We begin the day looking back almost exactly 4 years back to the night Russia unleashed its full-scale invasion on Ukraine. In the early hours of February 24th of 2022, Russian forces, which had been building up on Ukraine's borders, crossed into the country and began moving toward the capital, Kyiv. Many at the time thought it would only be a matter of days or weeks before Russia had full control over Ukraine. 4 years later, the front line is largely frozen, with Russian forces occupying some 20% of eastern and southern Ukraine. But today, one of Ukraine's top commanders said Kyiv had managed to restore control over some 400 square kilometers in recent weeks. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz noted those gains in a speech he gave today at an anniversary event in Berlin.
February saw astonishing territorial gains by the Ukrainian defense forces, and the Russian economy is creaking under the weight of sanctions and of warfare, more than we may sometimes surmise from our own media coverage here.
So where do things stand now after 4 years of war? I'm joined by Justin Crump, an intelligence and security analyst we've spoken to many times over the past 4 years. He's the founder and CEO of the think tank Sibylline. Good to see you, Justin. Now, we heard the German chancellor there saying Ukraine was performing better on the battlefield than is often reported, and by the sound of it, than he did expect. Do you agree with his assessment, though?
I do. I think Ukraine's done very well to stay in the fight for 4 years, and very well to largely have managed to freeze the front lines over the last few years against increasing Russian pressure. Obviously, we know the Russians have succeeded in grinding forward slowly in a number of places, but nonetheless, Ukrainians have done very well to hold as much ground as they have done, and that's taken a huge amount of effort. So I think it does get a little bit lost in a lot of the analysis going on at the moment, potentially partly because people remember after about 6 months of the war in Ukraine took back large swathes of territory against Russia. And of course, we've not seen maneuvers like that for quite some time. But nonetheless, Ukraine, doing well to stay in the fight, doing well to hold the front lines.
What's their secret? How do they manage to hold out for this long?
I mean, part of it is because Ukraine doesn't really have a choice. The Ukrainians are fighting for their homes, fighting for their land. And as Putin has said, where a Russian soldier treads, that is Russia. So they very clearly understand that if they cede any ground, it'll probably be lost forever. So that certainly focuses their minds. They've also taken a lot of advantage of new technologies, of improvising. We've seen that tactically. We've seen that with the use of drones. And particularly, actually at sea, where Ukraine, with no navy, has largely defeated the Black Sea Fleet, which is very notable indeed. But the same sort of use being made of drones on land, and ways to try and restore the balance for the Ukrainians. But really, fundamentally, it's the fact that they are fighting for their land, and Russia is not.
Looking at the conflict as a whole, to what extent would you say the past 4 years have changed how we think about modern warfare?
I think some of the lessons have been ones we expected. For example, I think the utility of drones is widely understood, but hadn't been practiced on the scale we've seen, particularly in the form of smaller drones, commercial drones, drones as weapons directly. Those are things that we hadn't seen in previous conflicts. But some of the lessons remain the same. The difficulty of taking ground once the front line goes static is something we've seen before, for example, in Iran and Iraq in the 1980s. Where that front line barely moved. And we've also seen the consequences of economic warfare, the way that you then see the targeting that Russia has undertaken change over time and to put pressure on the civilian population. Again, not new, but I think lessons there. And some aspects of hybrid warfare that we talk about a lot were actually not being seen to be particularly effective in Ukraine. For example, the information warfare and the cyber aspects, it remains very much a battlefield conflict. So, as always, mixed lessons. Some things are new, some things reinforce things we understood. But I mean, what it has shown us is the nature of warfare remains unchanging.
Ukraine's allies have, of course, been unable to stop Putin. Besides military support for Ukraine, sanctions have been their main tool to pressure the Kremlin. Why has that not been enough?
I mean, it certainly made life more difficult for Russia, but of course, Putin firmly in control of the country. It's a population that feels like it doesn't really have a choice or a say politically. They're quite resigned to doing what the leader says and what the government says in Russia. But, for example, VAT rates up another 2%. The economy in Russia clearly not doing brilliantly well. And although Russia's done pretty well to keep going against the sort of pressure it's had, obviously it gradually takes its toll. And where Russia's been effective in some ways is getting troops and volunteers from, if you like, less popular regions of Russia, keeping things away from the major cities where Putin cares the most. But of course, gradually that pressure is coming home to roost, even with that population. So it has had an effect. But I would characterize most of what we've done for Ukraine collectively in the West as not quite enough, not quite on time. But it's done a lot to keep them in the fight. It's done a lot to reduce the pressure Russia could have brought to bear. And I think now is the time that we have to see, can this effort be maintained? Can Ukraine be given enough to finally force the Russians into better concessions than they've offered so far?
Yeah, let's take a look at how these alliances have shifted, specifically in the past year since Donald Trump returned to the White House. Kyiv has become significantly more dependent on Europe. In your opinion, have European leaders risen to the occasion, or is it still a matter of life or death for Ukraine to stay in the U.S.'s good graces?
I mean, European leaders, I think, have done more initially than Putin expected. I think the Russians were quite surprised by the immediate reaction to the invasion, partly because European leaders, particularly in France and Germany, I think felt very let down that Putin had assured them that he wouldn't attack. The US, the UK and NATO collectively said he would, and he did. So the European reaction was quite strong initially and then sort of lagged, and then the US took a lot more effort. But really, since Trump came into the White House, the US effort has been negligible. And despite, I think, a lot of behind-the-scenes effort by US forces, Europe has taken the brunt and has kept Ukraine in the fight for the last year. So it shows it can be done. But it is, it's an intense effort. And of course, spending on Ukraine is money that can't be spent on European defence in the home nations. We can't rebuild our own forces with money that's gone to Ukraine. The big debate being, are we better off making sure that Ukraine wins or at least gets a just peace? Or do we need to prepare for what may come next from Russia, which remains a very clear long-term threat? And I think Zelensky's reinforced that himself in the last 24 hours in the speeches he's given. And I think he's correct in that. So that's the big question mark for Europe. It has picked up the slack. Is it committed to remain doing so? I think currently, yes. The view being that there's probably another year of fighting. Certainly through this summer, Russia's mobilised its reserves for that, so they'll almost certainly use them. And so there's a lot to play for while negotiations hopefully take place in the background.
Let's look at these negotiations. U.S. President Trump wanted to end the war on day one of his presidency, his second presidency. You and I were here today because that obviously did not happen. The efforts are still underway. Do you see these peace negotiations leading to anything resembling the just peace Ukraine is hoping for?
I mean, it is a process in these situations. Russia feels they can press harder and get more. As I said earlier, I think the Russians feel that if they're in a piece of land, once their soldiers are trodden on it, that's going to be theirs. Ukraine obviously has a different view. But the real sticking point is the just peace aspect. What are the guarantees for Ukraine in the long term? If Ukraine does have to cede territory that Russia won't give up once it's taken it, and of course Russia's passed laws internally to make the territory they've taken now Russian territory, what does Ukraine get in return? Does this finish, or is it just a repeat of what we saw in the various pieces since 2014 that were all broken? And indeed going all the way back to Budapest and the original agreement for Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons in order to not be attacked by Russia and others. So there's a long history of truces being broken for Ukraine, and that's the thing that they're most concerned with. But of course, adequate security guarantees probably not acceptable to Russia. So until someone's absolutely forced to accept things they don't want to accept, the process will carry on. But the battle on the land and sea and air will also carry on as all sides try and either hold the line in Ukraine's case or take more territory, put more pressure on in the case of Russia's.
The security analyst and Sibylline CEO Justin Crump, thank you so much for today and, of course, for sharing your expertise with us in the past 4 years. Always great to get your insights on the show.
Thank you.
Russia's war on Ukraine has, of course, taken a tremendous human toll on both sides. Exact casualty numbers are hard to come by, but it's clear that practically all Ukrainians' lives have been affected by 4 years of war. DW's Washington correspondent Misha Komodovsky met one young survivor of a Russian attack who traveled to the U.S. Capitol to lobby for continued American support for Ukraine.
One face of Russian atrocities in Ukraine, 11-year-old Roman Oleksiev. In 2022, a missile struck the hospital where he and his mother were staying. She died under the rubble. Roman suffered burns to nearly half his body. Now he's in Washington sharing his story with congressmen. But it's not the politicians who impress him most.
Honestly, I really like it here. There's so much snow, and the cars are really cool, especially the big trucks.
He really loves cars, so we just wanted to see what was here.
Roman has undergone multiple surgeries and rehabilitation in Germany, with more to come. Between treatments, hobbies keep his spirits up.
I love playing the accordion and ballroom dancing. And in fact, it's also therapy. Because when I play the accordion, it's therapy for my hand. And when I dance, it's therapy for my legs.
Does Dad help you play? Do you play together?
Yes, of course, I'm an accordion teacher. That's why I teach him to play. Our whole family is accordionists. My wife was an accordionist, Roman and I are as well.
Today, Roman has a message for the adults who will help decide his country's future. What would you tell them?
I would tell them to support Ukraine, to protect Ukrainian children, because when we are together, we are strong and invincible.
Roman is a child who has been harmed by the war, and when he tells politicians this himself, they understand it differently. His words land far more powerfully than if the same message came from an outside observer.
And both Democrats and Republicans hear him.
That it's impacting the children of Ukraine, that they're not only being bombed and maimed and scarred and killed, but they're being abducted by the Russians and indoctrinated. You know, I was watching a documentary. This is the exact playbook out of Nazi Germany they did with the Polish people. I mean, the message I'd like to send is that we support Ukraine, and I always have. We support countries against aggression, and you know, the Russians won't let up. But I'm a big fan of additional sanctions.
The longer the United States waits to make a very strong statement, the worse it is for Ukraine, but also the worse it is for America in terms of its support of democracy and freedom.
What would make that statement strong? Sanctions, more weaponry, more aid, more money?
All of the above. All of the above.
And just like Roman, hundreds of Ukraine supporters gathered here in Washington, D.C., urging the U.S. to do more. For the fourth year in a row, they rallied at the Lincoln Memorial, many hoping that this time may be the last.
We dream about it, but we have to be realized that Russia will not stop until massive sanctions, until their economic collapse, until their people, Russian people, will come to the streets protesting their government and protesting the genocidal war in Ukraine.
My dream is for the war in Ukraine to end, but children want just one thing: to go to school in peace, to play and to dream. The war has destroyed it all.
And to make this dream come true, Roman says he will keep sharing his story again and again.
And for a look at the human toll of this gruesome war, I now have the pleasure of welcoming Oleksandra Matviichuk. She's the founder of the Ukrainian Center for Civil Liberties and the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Oleksandra, thank you so much for joining us on DW today. Before we talk about the work you and the Center for Civil Liberties do, I want to ask you a personal question. How did your life change on February 24th of 2022?
Everything which I call normal life was ruined in one moment. For me and for millions of people in Ukraine, because to live during the large-scale war, it means that you live in total uncertainty. You can't plan not just your day, you can't plan your next several hours. You have no ideas what will happen. To live during the large-scale war means that such simple things as meet with your friends in a cafe or to hug your beloved ones or to have family dinners disappeared and crushed in hundreds of pieces.
Yeah. Now, a lot of the reporting on the war is focused on the front line, but I want to know from you, because you have a very special vision of how it affects the rest of the country. How has Ukraine changed? How have Ukrainians changed in these past 4 years?
It's a fourth winter of large-scale war, and it's very difficult because Russians deliberately destroyed energy grid, the very infrastructure that civilians depends on their survival. So people in Ukraine are literally freezing in their flats without heat, water, and electricity, but don't give up.
When looking at how this war has been covered, how would you say outside reporters and foreign analysts, what have they been getting wrong about Ukrainians in all of this?
I think one of the main problems is that we lose human dimension of this war in political process. When we look what politicians discussed in this frame of peace talk, which was initiated by President Trump, we see that politicians discussed natural minerals, Russia's territorial claims, geopolitical interests, but they don't speak about people. They speak about territories like as it empty spaces. I'm sorry, it's not empty spaces. Millions of Ukrainians live there. They live in gray zone. They have no tool how to defend their right, their freedom, their property, their life, their children, their beloved ones. And Russian occupation, it's not just changing one state flag to another. Russian occupation means enforced disappearances, torture, rape, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps and mass graves. And I think it's a huge problem that we lose human dimension in these political negotiations.
You're a human rights lawyer, and you once said that impunity is the engine of this war. How are you and your organization working to end that impunity?
We are documenting war crimes. We have in our database more than 98,000 episodes. It's a huge amount, but still just a tip of iceberg. Because all this hell which we face in Ukraine, it's a result of total impunity which Russia enjoyed for decades, committing horrible crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, in other countries of the world. Russians has never been punished. They believe they can do whatever they want.
Are you confident that Vladimir Putin will ever have to respond for the crimes he has had committed against Ukrainians?
We are working on it.
We're working on it.
We are working on it. I'm not naive. I know that there is no guarantees in our life, but we have chance. And it's a huge luxury to have chance, and we plan to use this chance.
What has it been like for you to see your country not only under constant attack, but also bear witness to all these horrific crimes throughout the past 4 years?
It's not easy because first we are human beings and then we are professional human rights lawyers. And we are documenting not just violations of Geneva and Hague conventions. We are documenting human pain. And when you work with human pain on a daily basis, in some periods you have this feeling that this pain burned you out.
How do you keep going? What's your motivation? What drives you to keep going day after day, you and your team?
People inspires me. We face with enormous of cruelty for one side, but from another side with enormous solidarity. And I don't wish any nation to go through the war, because war is the most horrible thing which just can happen in the human life. But I witness how these dramatic times provide people in Ukraine the opportunity to express the best in us. These dramatic times are literally test us for true courage, true leadership, and true responsibility. And I think that Ukrainians are passing this test with dignity.
They are very much indeed, and their dignity has impressed the world ever since the full-scale invasion started. Now, there are efforts underway to bring this war to an end diplomatically. There are these three-way talks with the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine at the table. I'd like to get your opinion. What do you make of them?
I think we have to define the goal properly. The goal is not just to sign the formal peace treaty. Because, let me remind, in 2014, when Russia invaded Ukraine and occupied Crimea and part of eastern regions, Ukraine had a zero chance to release these territories, and Ukraine signed 2 peace agreements with Russia, and Russia violated them both. So there is no need to have the third Minsk, the third peace agreement, which Russia will violate in future. The question is how to make Putin to stop this war.
Then my question is, how? Have you lost faith in diplomacy then?
I think that diplomacy must be strengthened by decisive actions, because our task is to make for Putin the price for war higher than the price for peace. Because now war is profitable for him. It's provide excuses for a lot of internal problems, it's centralized power, and he dreams about his legacy. His logic is historical. He wants to forcibly restore Russian Empire. And because human life is the cheapest resource in Russian state, Putin still doesn't refuse from his goal.
Yeah. We have to wrap up, but I don't want to let you go without asking you, what gives you hope at a moment like this and throughout the past 4 years?
I think we have to define the hope in a proper way, because hope, it's not a confidence that everything will be fine. Hope is a deep understanding that all our efforts have meaning.
Oleksandra Matviichuk, Nobel Peace Prize laureate and human rights lawyer, thank you so much for all the great work you've done and for taking the time to speaking to DW today. All the best to you.
Thank you.